Summer's come to an end, the kids are back at school. However, the state still does not have a budget for the new fiscal year. Joining me here today to talk about this and other budget-related issues is State Representative Steven Mentzer. Representative, welcome.
Thank you.
Now, last time we had you on, it was right after the governor's budget address back in March, and there's been a lot going on since then.
There has been a lot going on, and I think it'd be good if we could just do a little review of that.
I think that's a great idea.
Early March, the governor gives an address. Initial reaction by many was property tax relief, good thing. But when you dug deeper into the details, you found out that some people got property tax and a lot of people didn't. And in the 97th district, my district, which is Manheim Township, Warwick, and Lititz Borough, we did not fare well at all under the governor's program. So the governor decides to propose one of the largest tax increases in Pennsylvania history. I think some people could debate that it is the largest tax increase in Pennsylvania's history. And we, in my district, would have to send most of it back up to Harrisburg to be redistributed. So this was much of the talk for, I would say, April and May. And I know we've had a lot of conversation, the rank and file, with our leadership. And our leadership has suggested that they had made lots of overtures to the governor to talk about coming up with a compromise. And so we've got the whole way up to June, and we really didn't seem to be getting anywhere. And so on June 1st, as you know, the House decided to vote on the governor's budget as an amendment to another revenue bill.
And this was after House Democrats wanted to vote to spend the money before they figured out where the money they were spending was coming from.
Exactly. I mean, there's a very aggressive spending plan in this budget. And if we had unlimited money, if we had Uncle Fred, who we inherited all kinds of money from, I mean, you know, sure, we'd all like to spend all kinds of money. But this is taxpayer money. This is money coming out of hardworking Pennsylvanians. And so we have to consider that before we have any kind of a spending plan. And that's one of the reasons I believe our leadership in the House decided that they were going to put up the governor's exact plan as an amendment to another revenue bill.
And once House Republicans proposed the governor's plan, which, if I remember correctly, there was no Democrat on the House floor that was willing to put their name as a prime sponsor of that amendment or in bill form. And there was a vote taken up, and it seemed the consensus was unanimous on the House that it was not going to be passed.
Well, absolutely. We had to have one of our own members put the amendment on the bill. We couldn't get someone from the other side to even sponsor his budget. So we did. And we did not receive one Democrat or one Republican vote. So what is of concern to everyone is that the governor is using this baseline of his proposed budget, which got no support from either party, as a starting point. And that's just not going to work.
Shortly after that happened, the governor and House Democratic leadership called what was done on the House floor a stunt, that it was games played by Republican leadership. Was that the case?
Well, I don't know what they're talking about. I mean, basically, they either are for his budget or they're against his budget. I don't know what you could call a stunt there. You know, if they want to bring the bill up again, we'll see how much support it gets. If it was a stunt, then maybe we can get 82 votes from the other side. But, you know, I just don't think that's going to be the case, and that's why one of the reasons we're here now.
And the governor, he wanted his budget bill to be considered holistically, which it was. It failed. And then for about 28 days after that, the governor still pushed that failed plan.
Exactly, and that is why on June 30th, the legislature placed on his desk a on-time, balanced budget. Essentially, we had no choice. If we were going to have to try to deal with somebody who wasn't going to come off his baseline that had no support, then we needed to drive the train or drive the truck ourselves, and we did. And we placed an on-time, balanced budget on the governor's desk on June 30th.
Now, after his budget failed on June 1st, and still talking about the same thing for 30 days, within about an hour, he decided that he was going to veto the bill in full, which is the first time it's been done in decades. It hasn't been done in my lifetime. How did the full budget veto affect Pennsylvania State compared to what other governors had done in the past with blue lining the budget?
It's why we're in the position we're in right now. Essentially, we place an on-time budget on this individual's desk. He vetoes it, doesn't do a line item veto, does a total veto. If you go back to 1968, no governor has ever done a total veto. And before that is when the Constitution changes. I would challenge anybody to look back to see whether any governor has done it. So what has the consequences been? What have the consequences been? Well, now we're talking in early September that funding to vital agencies are not being funded. In that budget that we put on the governor's desk, 274 out of the 411 line items were agreed upon. We gave him what he wanted.
If not more.
And he decided on a total veto, which holds up funding on those 274 line items, which means some of these emergency services, these social services that need the funding, are currently not getting the funding.
Let's focus on that for a little bit. After the mistake, which I kind of thought it may have just been just governor's first time. He said that night on June 30th, I was in the room, he asked what the difference was between withholding his signature to a budget bill and vetoing it. Mm-hmm. So it may have just been that he didn't realize the different ways he could do the veto, but when House Republicans tried to do veto overrides on August 25th, again, Democrats stonewalled and nothing was done. Tell us a little bit about that day.
Exactly. I think, you really have to know more about the timeline from June 30th until that day. August 24th, or was it 25th?
The 25th.
The 25th. Don't forget, the House Republicans continued to try to make overtures to this governor from June 30th until August 19th. And on August 19th, they made an overture to the executive office that they might be willing to consider an increase in education funding for primary education, all right? Giving the executive branch what they asked for under that one line item, which is a very important line item to the governor, which is basic education funding. They decided that they would give him the full amount, or suggest giving him the full amount, if they could get the compromise on the pension reform and liquor privatization.
Pension reform and liquor privatization was also sent to the governor's desk, and that they were also vetoed.
They were vetoed. I think it wasn't that in an hour. I think it took a little longer than that, maybe 3 days, but they were vetoed. So, again, my point is that we have, as a House and a Senate, made overtures towards the governor's office to try to get some kind of compromise, and it's not coming. In fact, on August 19th, when they made the overture, I think the governor himself suggested that he thought it was fairly reasonable. But now we are here a month later, and we don't hear anything. So in the meantime, we have these social service agencies that are in dire straits. There are people out there that need this funding. And, we're going to have to come up with another solution. So that brings us up to the August 25th. What we tried to do was pick out 20 of the most needed line items, ones that needed to be funded the most, all right? And we thought we would just do a line item veto on those 20 to 21 line items.
And can you explain, for people watching, what is a line item veto and what is needed to have that occur?
Well, to override a veto, you need 2/3 of the vote. Versus a simple majority. So essentially there are 119 Republicans and 83 Democrats. 119 Republicans could not overturn a veto of the governor. But if we did get 15 to 20 of the Democrats to go along with it, then we could override the veto. That day we were not successful. We could not get any member of the opposition party to go along with our override. Which brings us to your point. I mean, initially you might have thought that there might have been some confusion by the governor as to a line item veto versus a total veto. But as we move farther and farther down the road, we realize that, this is not confusion. This is an intentional way to try to get a compromise by using social service agencies as hostages or pawns in budget negotiations, again, which has never been done in the history that I know of. So, you know, I think, you know, we're going to have to do something here, and you know, we can talk about that a little bit later, but you know, I think that's where we're at.
And to that point, as far as using these line items and these people as pawns, that day on the House floor, I believe that one of the gentlemen from the other side of the aisle stated just that and encouraged his colleagues to not vote for the overrides because he felt that that would, I guess, take their clout away when it came to negotiations.
Yeah, I mean, I'm amazed. I just didn't, in my lifetime, I'm 59 years old, I didn't realize that you negotiated you know, that way. It seems to me that you would want to negotiate in a more friendly fashion. I mean, you know, everybody's objectives are well-intentioned. It's just how we get to the end. This is a democracy. It works in a slower fashion. We need to gain consensus. But, you know, holding as individuals, some of the most needy in our community, as pawns or hostage is just not, in my opinion, not a real good and fair way to go about that negotiation.
So in regards to some of those line items, how are they affecting your constituents in the 97th District? Who have you heard from? What agencies have you heard from? How are they struggling?
We have a number of different agencies in Lancaster County. We've actually, as a delegation, called them together, and we're going to meet with them shortly to hear their concerns, so that we have a better knowledge of how this is actually affecting all of those social service agencies in our area. Governor,
when he first was sworn into office, he talked about government that works, schools that teach, jobs that pay. Do you feel that his initial budget proposal, and I mean, we haven't seen a counter proposal, so we really can't talk about that, but do you feel any of his plans, such as the property tax reform proposal, do you think they go towards that three-legged stool?
Well, you know, property tax is an issue, particularly for my district, and it's a very important issue because in the 97th District, we have been growing areas, and we've had to rely more and more on our local taxpayers through property tax to fund our educational system. So this is a very important issue to us in the 97th District. The problem in his proposal is that we don't get a chance to keep the increased income tax and sales tax in our district. In other words, if it was a dollar-for-dollar reduction in the amount of income that we generated through an increased sales tax and income tax, it would be more palatable to the 97th District. But in fact, we don't get the chance to keep even half of what is raised through the income tax and the sales tax. So, you know, it's not beneficial to us. As far as his jobs that pay, you know, I believe the way to increase a workforce is through the private sector, not expanding the public sector. You know, and that means we need to get businesses up and running. I have a great project in my district, Rock Lidditz, that is doing very, very well, that will wind up increasing the number of jobs available in Lancaster County by somewhere between 300 and 500. That's how you expand jobs, not by increasing government and increasing taxes.
All right, well, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk more about Governor's tax plan and jobs.
That's great.
Legislative report, we'll be back in just a moment.
Did you know that Act 16 of 1999 honors one of the greatest leaders in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives? The Matthew J. Ryan Legislative Office Building, once known as the Capitol Annex, is located next to the main Capitol building and honors the late Speaker of the House, Matthew J. Ryan. Those who visit this building will observe the magnificent architectural designs providing eloquence and grandeur to the building. Known as one of the greatest members in the history of the Pennsylvania State House, Matthew Ryan started his career in the legislature in 1963 and was elected Speaker in 1981. His charisma and knowledge will forever be reflected in the building now named after this great legislative leader. Now you know.
Did you know that Violet Oakley was the first female artist to receive a large commission for artwork done in a United States Capitol building? In 1902, Joseph Houston, designer and architect for the 3rd Harrisburg Capitol building, commissioned Violet Oakley to paint murals for the governor's reception room. He believed that Oakley's contribution would add interest to the building and act as an encouragement of women of the state. Prior to beginning her work for the Capitol, Oakley set out to England to conduct research for her murals. Upon return, she decided to center her artwork on William Penn and the founding of Pennsylvania. Oakley made sure that Penn's ideals of justice and peace could be seen throughout her work. In 1906, she completed 13 murals titled "The Founding of the State of Liberty Spiritual" and was placed in sequential order around the governor's reception room. These murals were some of the first to be installed in the Capitol. When Edwin Austin Abbey, another artist for the Capitol, died in 1911, Oakley was offered another opportunity to create murals for the unfinished Senate and Supreme Court chambers. Her work on the Senate murals, including International Understanding, was completed by 1919. Oakley then completed the Supreme Court murals, including the Divine Law, by 1927. Oakley is said to be the principal artist for the Capitol, with a total of 43 murals on display. She remains one of the greatest muralists in the United States. Now you know.
Did you know the Avenue of Flags presentation at Indiantown Gap National Cemetery has over 500 casket flags? Among the flags displayed are Commonwealth, territorial, and military flags. The flags are tied to 20-foot poles spaced 40 feet apart on both sides of the main drive of the cemetery. It takes about 2 hours to set up and take down all of the flags. Volunteers are encouraged to help with this task and must be at least 13 years of age. All of the flags are donated to the Avenue of Flags by families of the deceased. Now you know.
Welcome back to the program. I'm here with State Representative Steven Mentzer talking about the 2015-2016 budget, which, as we mentioned before, we still do not have signed into law.
Exactly.
Now, before we went to break, we were talking a little bit about funding your school districts back home. How much funding do your school districts get from the state?
We get substantially less than the state average. My one school district, out of the 503 school districts in the state, is 495th to the lowest. That's Manheim Township, which only gets 18% of its funding from the state. Warwick fares a little bit better. They get about 29% of their funding from the state. So a lot of the people in my district already feel as though they are providing subsidy or extra funding for those school districts where they're not as affluent. So the governor's plan just simply didn't work for our district because, you know, it would make the situation much, much worse. That being said, we've had a commission to study funding formulas. And it was a bipartisan commission, and they had a successful time of it, I understand. And we have a pretty much agreed upon new way of driving out the state funding to school districts. So it is my hope that in any kind of budget that we get coming up here, that any new money that is applied to education funding, either through the basic education or any other area, should be driven out through that new funding formula. And you know, I'm looking forward to that and looking forward to talking about that.
And in regards to that new formula, you mentioned it was bipartisan, bicameral group. Governors,
Right.
people were involved.
Right.
The purpose of that is to do what?
It's to basically drive out funding based on student and student need rather than district, all right? And, you know, I think that's the way it should be. There are many, many school districts in the state of Pennsylvania that are getting 60 to 70% of their funding from the state. They're in areas where population has decreased, and it has really handicapped areas like my district. So this is one way to try to even that out, try to make that better.
Also, we were talking a little bit about jobs, and you mentioned that you feel the best way to provide good jobs is to help grow the private sector. One big topic over the past couple months was the Marcellus Extraction Tax. And
Exactly.
I know we spoke before, and you said that you are not opposed to a fair tax, correct?
Exactly. But I think we have to really put this in context, because things have changed in that industry. And we have to be able to adjust our thinking based on the changes. Now, the governor has suggested that we're going to get $1 billion from his extraction tax plan. And I'm sorry, that's simply not going to happen. And let me explain to you why. A developer of natural gas in Pennsylvania, it will cost him about $2.50 per 1,000 cubic feet. That's the unit they use to measure, $2.50 to break even. In other words, he doesn't make a dime if the price of natural gas is at $2.50. It takes all that $2.50 to get the thing out of the ground, to drill the hole and get it out of the ground. Right now in Pennsylvania, do you want to take a guess at what the market price for natural gas is in Pennsylvania?
I would think probably around $3.
No, it's $1.40.
So
Nationally, it is, in the national market, or in the New York market, it's at, I think, around $2.90, $2.80. We have so much natural gas here in Pennsylvania that we can't get it out of the state fast enough. Our price doesn't get anywhere close to that.
and why is that?
Well, it's because we don't have enough pipelines to get this stuff to market. And we've drilled so much that we just have an overabundance. With this price reduction, or this price slide, at $1.40, how many people do you think are actually going to invest money when they know it costs them $2.50 to get the gas out of the ground, and they're only going to get $1.40 for it?
I can't think of anyone.
Well, and that's exactly why rig counts are going down. Some of the flow of gas out of the state has dropped dramatically because people who have developed gas have decided not to let it, decided not to bring it to production as fast. So the whole point of this conversation is you're not going to get $1 billion out of the Marcellus Shale industry or the development industry at this time. As a matter of fact, I'd be surprised if we got 25% of what was expected, maybe even less than that. So, you know, that should be taken into consideration in any kind of discussion about taxing an industry, particularly when the industry is currently not making, you know, any money. So, you know, there needs to be more discussion about this. I know there will be. Again, I've got no problems with a reasonable extraction tax that could take the place of the impact fees and the fees we already have. And I'm looking forward to those conversations, but I think the environment has to be kept in mind.
So to look at the plan the governor had originally proposed and assume that we can have this increase of education funding from Marcellus Extraction Tax, that's just
not going to happen. It's not going to happen. That's a dream. I mean, with the current market the way it is, that is not going to happen.
Now, we've heard in the news over the past couple of weeks that mailers have been dropped into various districts around the state. I know your constituents were hit with them talking about your stance on the whole Marcellus Shale issue. Can you address that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I found it extremely interesting. A new way of negotiation, I guess. On off years, you get political and you send things into representatives' districts like that's going to change, you know, my mind. It hasn't changed my stance at all. My stance has been the same from the get-go. But again, I find it interesting that this is how the executive branch would decide it's going to try and negotiate.
Now, before we get into what's next, I just want to quickly touch on liquor and pension. Two historic pieces of legislation that the House and Senate were finally able to get through in both chambers and sent to the governor, and ultimately, as we mentioned, they were vetoed. How do you think going forward they can be helpful in maybe coming up with putting this budget together?
Well, I mean, I think that was part of our original proposal on June 30th. You know, we feel as though the total privatization of the wine and spirits business in Pennsylvania will supply an additional $220 million to the state. That's in addition to all the taxes that we already receive from the wine and spirits business. Same goes for pension reform. This wasn't exactly what I would be doing if I had a magic wand and could reform the pension situation. I mean, I would go a lot farther than this bill did, but again, in democracy and in government, you don't have magic wands. But this will allow us to save some money for our pension system and at least stop the problem from growing or getting larger. So these are two very important pieces in budget negotiations because they make more revenue available and there are some cost savings in there.
Okay, so now we're here, like we said, into the fall. We have no budget. The next logical step that we've been hearing some rolling about is a stopgap budget. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I think it's an absolute necessity. There are 274 line items that have been agreed upon. There are significant differences in philosophy between the one side and the other. And to come up with a compromise on some of these difficult issues may take some time. And I'll be the first one to suggest I think we should have this budget done on June 30th. It's not happening, but at the very minimum, we need to start getting money flowing to those areas that need it, particularly the social service agencies and the educational system. So a stopgap budget is, in my opinion, a necessity. And I believe and I'm hopeful that we're going to come back here in September and propose some kind of a stopgap funding measure. Simply meaning that let's take last year's budget, let's take those funding levels, let's agree upon those until we can get the other issues worked out. So, you know, by the time this program airs in certain areas, I would hope that we have a stopgap measure. I truly do. If not, you can be sure that I will be advocating for just that.
Stopgap seems like the logical next step, but we've seen logic has been thrown out the window recently. What is the danger of doing nothing?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of danger to Pennsylvania in doing nothing, and I think we're starting to see it already. There's a danger to the most vulnerable people in our community. I'm talking about the aging that are in assisted living. We'll have problems with our educational system. We don't want the children to suffer over this. You know, there's just a lot of consequences to no action here. I mean, we simply have to do something, and you know, I'm confident that we will.
All right, Representative Mentzer, thank you for taking the time to speak to us about the situation at hand, and look forward to hopefully have a resolution and talking to you about the final product.
Hey, thank you very much.
That's all the time we have for today's program. If you need assistance with any state government matter, feel free to contact Representative Mentzer at his local office or through his website. That information will be shown in just a moment. Thanks for watching, and please join us again next time for another edition of Legislative Report.